if you're always seeking the rare and the elusive stuff, everybody else is also doing that. And it's understandable why they're doing that. But it means that common species are overlooked so much that they're forgotten about. And there is so much potential with common species because everybody ignores them, or most people ignore them. And common species can be 5 minutes down the road.
Welcome to the She Clicks Women in Photography podcast. I'm Angela Nicholson, and I'm the founder of She Clicks, which is a community for female photographers. In these podcasts, I talk with women in the photographic industry to hear about their experiences, what drives them, and how they got to where they are now. This episode is with Tesni Ward, a wildlife photographer who believes that all species have value, so she's as happy photographing a pigeon as she is a lion. When she's not capturing her own images, Tesni runs photographic workshops and tours. Hi Tesni, thank you so much for joining me today on the She Clicks Women in Photography podcast. It's really great to chat with you.
It's a pleasure to see you again.
Thank you. Now, although we've spoken on many occasions in the past, I realised when I was sort of thinking about what I want to talk to you about, I don't actually know how you got into photography. So perhaps you can fill me in and the listeners on how that happened.
So I did photography for maybe 3 or 4 years where it would just be on holiday with the family. I had a point and shoot, which was originally actually an Olympus camera that I managed to drown in the sea and then ended up with a Panasonic Lumix. But I'd take photos once a year on the holiday and then I wouldn't pick it up again. I wouldn't really take any pictures when I was back home. And then I really started getting into it a little bit more, maybe a year or two before I went full-time. So I was driving around the Peak District trying to get landscapes, wildlife, pretty much anything nature-orientated. And then I was made redundant from my job, which was a blessing in disguise because I had just spent over £10,000 on a photography trip and a big fat Hubble telescope lens. So it was not the best of times to be made redundant, but it gave me the kick up the backside that I needed. And I decided whilst on that trip, why not try and be a photographer full time? And somehow it's still working out all right.
Excellent. So literally, it was just a year from you deciding I'm quite interested in photography, I'll get more involved with it, to you actually going full time.
Yeah, so I went to, my first solo holiday was to Alaska, and it was specifically for photography. I had a major lens mishap on the trip, so it was a little bit disastrous, but still an incredible experience. And then I'm pretty sure it was the following year when I did the next trip, made redundant a week before, and then it was like, yeah, do you know what? I enjoy this. I kind of know my way around a camera by now, so let's give it a go, see how I get on. Because if it ends up failing, then I can always just go back to a normal job.
Mixed blessings with the timing of the message, because a week before you go on holiday, you kind of think, you could potentially spend the whole time worrying about that. Or because you've got that separation, you can have a bit more of maybe a calmer view, reflect upon it a bit more. Is that how you found it?
I found out they took me to a Holiday Inn Express. So nice and public to try and dampen down my reaction. That failed. And I was pretty upset about it because I'd taken all of my money out of my savings for the trip and the lens. So I knew somebody who lived in Skye, at the Isle of Skye, and I ended up just saying, can I please come up there for a few days because I'm a bit of a mess. So I just went up to Skye. The weather was glorious British weather with sideways rain and very low cloud, and didn't get anything. But it was just a little bit of an escape. And then on the trip, it's fair to say I was probably not in the best mental frame of mind, but anyone who's been on safari anywhere in Africa can attest to the fact that you wake up and everything about it, the smells, the sounds, the light, the colours, it just puts a smile on your face. So it was a very useful distraction. And I had equipment that wasn't failing me. I was having an amazing time. I was out there for 2 weeks. And I just decided, do you know what, stuff this, I'm gonna give it a go. And I got a little bit of inspiration. One chap who was there for 1 week and then left, he left a little book outside my tent and a little note, which was basically like, go and do what you want to do, go and live your life. And it was like, do you know what? What's the worst that could happen? I fail and I go back to working in a normal job. So I decided to stuff it. Let's go for it. Let's try.
Nice. Isn't that nice of him to leave that book? Are you still in touch with that chap?
He was a hobby photographer. He's now become full-time. He runs tours across the world, and he's based in America. He's an absolutely lovely chap, great photography, and I'm really pleased that things are going well for him as well.
Yeah, good. Sometimes you just need that little kind of spark, don't you? Something, especially when something really bad's happened, you kind of just need somebody to drop something in, and you sort of think, yeah, okay. So why wildlife photography?
It doesn't talk back. The one thing that I said when I started supposedly doing it full time, albeit with no plan or idea on how to do it, I said the day I have to do a wedding to pay my bills is the day I quit. I'm not a people person. I'm not good with people in general, and there's just something about nature and wildlife and being out in the middle of nowhere that's just, it's something else. It's an escape. And especially with wildlife, because that's what I did, landscapes and wildlife, but I ended up specialising in wildlife. You do build essentially relationships with the wildlife that you work with. If you're working with the same location or the same family time after time, you feel a bond with them, and it's so rewarding to be able to watch them go about their day-to-day lives, especially if you see them when they're young, when they're cubs, and you watch them grow, personality start to shine through. You can't put a price on those kinds of experiences. So there's just something about it that keeps me coming back for more.
Yeah. So what were the first few months like as a full-time photographer? I know you're not calling yourself professional. You talk about being a full-time photographer, but that does mean you were trying to earn money from it.
I didn't have a plan at all. I didn't understand or have a clue how on earth you actually make this work. So for the first few months, I just went out with the camera as often as possible, exploring the Peak District, not actually getting as many images as I'd perhaps have liked, but just, trying to get really involved in it and enjoy it. Not having a job to worry about is obviously useful, because it's just like you wake up and it's like, what are we doing today? What are we going to go and photograph? But I was making no money at all. There used to be, or some photographers speak of the golden era, which was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, where you just go out, take photos as often as possible, and you could easily earn six-figure sums if you were a good photographer. Obviously, there were unique challenges back then in terms of the equipment that you had. Potentially, in some regards, wildlife wasn't quite as accessible as it can be now, but it's incredibly hard to make money by just taking photos these days. So I started to realise I need to find other ways where I can still do my photography, but still just be able to pay my bills. I'm not bothered about being rich or famous or being able to afford mansions. I just want to be comfortable and enjoy my life. So I ended up teaching people, workshops, tours, public speaking, writing articles. I work with magazines sometimes, which is quite nice. And I do still sell images as prints or stock images as well. But I find that there's not one source in particular that will cover everything. It's useful to have several sources of income. And, some months there's not much wildlife around. September for me is a quieter month because it's a transition when it comes to British wildlife. But that's when the talk season starts to pick up. So you find yourself visiting more clubs and organisations. Christmas coming up, people are more interested in prints and get something nice for their wall. So it varies from month to month in terms of what I'm doing, but it took quite a bit of time to figure it out. I was going to lots of craft fairs and markets, hating my life. I was not having fun with them. People were emailing me saying, can you come and photograph the family? And in my head I'm thinking, really don't want to, but then the bank account screaming at me, you kind of need to. So I did some things that I'm not that good at. But luckily, as things started working out and I started finding my feet, I was able to just start doing what I enjoy doing and not having to do some of the commissions or jobs where it's very much out of my comfort zone, which isn't a bad thing, but it's just I struggle with people.
As much as it is good to go outside of your comfort zone, sometimes we all need a little bit of comfort as well. So, you like to have your own little area where you can feel comfortable, so then you can sort of venture out and do something a bit different every now and again. But was there any particular point or, a step in your career where you kind of thought, now I'm getting traction, this is how it's going to work?
I think there must have been, but if I'm brutally honest, I can't pinpoint when exactly that happened. I was kind of just fumbling around in the dark, just trying to find my way. And I found that with many professional or full-time photographers, everybody has their own way that they make it work. Some people spend a lot of time doing exhibitions and craft fairs and that kind of thing, and they focus on their prints. I found quite early on it just wasn't quite right for me. So I did my time, and then decided, no, can't do this anymore. And I may have blabbered on a couple of times saying I'm not a people person. I can be a people person. It just takes, I'm introverted, so it takes energy to spend time with people. But when people are great, and there are a lot of great people out there, and a lot of people that I work with, I've got so much time for them. Once you've developed just that little bit of rapport, it's easy. I may still go home and collapse at the end of the day, but because the battery is drained. But it's really nice to be able to show people some of the amazing things in the UK and further afield when it comes to wildlife, and just seeing people's faces light up when they've been desperate to see a certain species of wildlife, or we see something that's just out of the ordinary, and just seeing their face light up and the excitement, and when they're reviewing their images and they realise they've got something really cool. I love that so much. I get so much enjoyment out of other people's enjoyment.
Yeah, I can understand that entirely. I think, when you have facilitated someone to achieve something that they really want to do, it does make you feel very, it gives you a special feeling, I think. So at what point did you start offering workshops and one-to-ones?
I'm pretty sure I did it in the first year, but I only offered a couple. From day one, I didn't want to be offering anything that I wasn't confident that I could deliver on. And obviously with wildlife, there is always an element that's out of your control, but I won't take people somewhere where there's a 20% chance of seeing something. I want to go somewhere where there's an 80-90% chance of seeing something. So I did a handful of smaller workshops where I was just confident I can deliver. I've been to these locations many times before, so I know what I'm doing by now. And it's just been a development over time, finding certain ways of wording things, certain phrases that I use these days that are just, that they help people remember. Because it's so easy, if you've been doing photography for some time, it's so easy to just think, oh, why don't you know that? Why don't, surely you understand the exposure triangle, and why don't you understand aperture? But if people actually think back to when they started photography, these things were alien to us as well, and they were confusing. And I remember aperture and depth of field, I was so confused. It's important sometimes to remember that everybody started from somewhere, and I always just try and find little phrases that help people to remember things that are otherwise quite complicated. And I really hate some of the technical terms that are often used, stopping down, stopping up, all of this kind of thing. It's just, what does that mean? So I'm always just trying to not dumb it down, but just you don't have to sound fancy. You don't have to understand the fancy stuff to be a great photographer. So if we can make it simple and accessible for everybody, it should be good all round.
Yeah. Please excuse this interruption. This episode is sponsored by OM System, empowering consumers and professionals alike with innovative digital cameras, lenses, audio recorders and binoculars. OM System's precision optics and groundbreaking technology open up new possibilities for capturing life's most precious moments. Okay, let's get back to the show. What would you say are your favourite wildlife subjects?
Badgers are number one still. I've been really unfortunate not being able to work with them for 4 years.
Oh, really? That long?
Which is an ongoing frustration. When COVID kicked off, all fun and games, they also brought the badger cull to Derbyshire, which was really upsetting and disappointing on several fronts, but it was a double whammy. And Derbyshire police were being a little bit heavy-handed with the restrictions. There were people getting fined because they were carrying coffee on their 30-minute exercise runs. So I didn't particularly feel comfortable, even though it was about a 20-minute drive. And technically it was work. I didn't feel comfortable going out. I didn't want to risk getting in trouble. And then when the cull kicked off that autumn, it was disastrous for the family that I'd worked with for a few years. And finding a good photographic set where your presence there isn't putting the badgers at risk and the light is good and the conditions are good, it can be quite difficult. I have so many sites that I know of that at face value are perfect, but the badgers don't come out until it's 11 o'clock at night, and that's just not going to work for my type of photography. So I've recently moved about 3 or 4 months ago. I've been so busy I've just not had the time, but in September when it quietens down a bit, I'm going to be out as often as possible, walking all of the local routes, finding a new badger set, hopefully, so that next spring I can finally work with them again, because I miss them so much.
Yeah, fingers crossed for that, because that must have been absolutely devastating for you. And I hope you can discover a new set and a new family. That would be great. What about if you haven't been photographing badgers for 4 years? What has taken their place in front of your camera?
So I try not to discriminate against species, but there's definitely ones that stand out more than others. Mountain hares will always have a special place in my heart. They are such special animals. And I'm very fortunate to work with them every winter. The past 2 winters, there's been a hare called Cammy, who I found out this winter is actually a boy, not a girl. And again, being able to go back to that same hare over and over again, seeing essentially the trust develop over time, it's such a rewarding thing. People laugh about it. Pigeons. I flipping love pigeons. I love any species that the general public don't look on particularly fondly. And pigeons are one of the public enemies, I would argue. People, for the most part, don't like them. They call them flying rats. They look at them as vermin. But if you just step back and actually spend a little bit of time with them, they are such quirky birds. Their personality is incredible. They sometimes look like a dumb bird, but they're genuinely not. They're one of the most intelligent species that we have. They can recognise their own reflection in the mirror, which a cat and dog can't do, but a pigeon can.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's quite a few things that really do make them stand out. But again, they've got this stigma. People hate them. Whereas I look at them and I think they're beautiful. Their eyes are striking. They've got little dinosaur feet. The iridescence on their plumage and the variation in the plumage, if you're looking at feral pigeons, that they've just got so much going for them. And it wasn't that long ago in the grand scheme of things where we relied on pigeons and we loved pigeons. And then all of a sudden something changed and now we hate them. So I want to try and change opinions on them. They might inconvenience you occasionally. They might poop on your car and you might think there's too many of them. But once upon a time there was too many passenger pigeons and we shot them to extinction. So we really shouldn't take any species for granted.
And are you photographing them in urban environments or rural?
Usually urban, because again, feral pigeons in an urban environment, that's where you get the conflict with people. But things like wood pigeons, any opportunity I get to photograph a pigeon or a dove, I'm going to take advantage of it. So sadly, because I've moved quite far from the spot where I had been working with them for some time. So I need to find a new location, and I might have found one, but I need to actually try it out a few more times and see if there's potential.
How much of your time do you spend researching locations or species?
Not enough. One of the frustrations when you become a so-called full-time photographer is, in order to make it work financially, your personal photography sometimes has to step to the side. And this is something I've really been trying to address over the past couple of years, because I don't want to be a photographer who never takes her own images. That you're not a photographer then. So, typically I'm working so much that I don't have time to go and research locations. When I'd go out finding new locations, I'd be out all day walking down various tracks, and I'd be researching on Google Maps, on OS Maps. So it takes time to do this, and unfortunately at the moment I haven't had the time. But again, I'm looking at September and I'm thinking I've got some good free time here. I can work with this. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that I'll get plenty of time and I'll be able to search around and find some badgers, foxes if I'm lucky. There's plenty of species I really want to work with. So I'm not going to say no if I find something amazing, regardless of how rare or sought after the species is. If it's a good location, it's a good location.
Yeah, a great image is a great image. Like you're saying, looking for the right light and the location, all of those things. It doesn't really matter the species if it's a great photo. We'll be right back after this short break. Please excuse this interruption. This podcast is supported by Canon, a leading technology company founded in Japan in 1937. Canon is dedicated to helping people reimagine and push the boundaries of what is possible through imaging. Canon believes in living and working together for the common good to develop a better society and a more inclusive and equitable world. Let's get back to the episode.
I think it's one of the things that really limits photographers is there's nothing wrong with having target species or species you're really passionate about. I find that everybody, they will go out and photograph a certain species. Sometimes it's foxes, it can be pine martens, red squirrels, and there's something about the encounter that it's just different. There's something about it that just draws you to them. And then all of a sudden that is your favourite species. But if you're always seeking the rare and the elusive stuff, everybody else is also doing that. And it's understandable why they're doing that. But it means that common species are overlooked so much that they're forgotten about. And there is so much potential with common species because everybody ignores them, or most people ignore them. And common species can be 5 minutes down the road from you. Arguably, it's harder to get an impactful image of a pigeon if you put it side by side with a puffin. If you put a very average puffin and a cracking pigeon, the puffin's probably still going to do better in terms of the general public, what they're looking for. If you're popping it on social media, a puffin will do better. But you should do your photography not to please others, but to please yourself. And part of photography is developing and growing your skill set and how you approach photography. You will grow a lot faster if you work with the common species. And the time you spend with them, you'll actually realise that you've been missing a trick all along. Because mallards, pigeons, coots, whatever it is, they are actually pretty quirky animals in their own right. They all have their own personalities and they're a joy to work with. So don't feel like you have to just, pardon the pun, pigeonhole yourself into a small number of species. Look at everything. Everything has potential.
I think that's a very compelling argument. Personally, I love a mallard. I think they're great. They're so much more accessible. So, say you think I'm going to photograph puffins and you've automatically got to go to a point on the coast at the right time of year. If you want to, photograph golden eagles or something, they're even harder to find. So if you decide I'm going to document mallards and their life cycle or something like that, then you can probably a pond nearby, there's a river, there's going to be loads around. So you have much more opportunity. So yeah, I can see it's and you'll learn a lot more in the process because you're shooting more.
Yep, and just because it's common today does not mean it's common tomorrow, next year, the next 10 years. Water voles used to be common as muck. They were everywhere. And I guarantee if back in those days they had the camera equipment we have today, people would not have been photographing them that much. Because in the grand scheme of things, they are a chubby brown rat. A very cute chubby brown rat. But that's essentially what they are. But all of a sudden, because they are now incredibly difficult to find and the population is still, for the most part, declining, all of a sudden people are really eager to photograph them. They see the potential in the species that was already there just because it's now rare.
A bit more elusive.
Yes. A mallard is the most common duck in the world. And a lot of people are often surprised to find out that on the RSPB list, they're actually amber listed in the UK.
Oh, wow.
So just because they are everywhere at the moment does not mean that they're going to be around forever. There are plenty of things that put them at risk, and just don't overlook them. Ignore the public opinion, ignore the rarity, just see them for what they are. And you can take an amazing photo of literally anything. Anything with a heartbeat, with fur or feathers, I'm game for it. I'll photograph it.
What about scales?
Yeah, I love common lizards as well. So, yeah.
Okay, just to be clear. You're an OM System Ambassador, formerly Olympus. How did that come about, and what kind of impact has that had on your career?
So I was incredibly lucky when I was made redundant, and I loosely just decided I'm a photographer now. About 2 weeks later, somebody at Olympus contacted me and said, "Are you interested in trying our gear? We'll be at the photography show. It'd be cool to meet you." So I thought, you know what? You don't turn down a free trial.
No.
It never hurts to know what else is out there. And I often find people stick with what they originally got, whether it was a hand-me-down camera or they knew somebody with that brand, so they just ended up with it as well. You end up in one camp. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have the best system for you. So I thought, give it a go. At the time, I was starting to get a little bit more interested in video as well, and the system I had was not suitable for video. So gave it a go, met them, lovely team, really enthusiastic. It took me a few months to get into it, if I'm honest. It was such a big jump from the system that I had been using, moving over to what at the time was the EM1 Mark 1.
Yeah.
So I had a few issues that I was struggling with. And lo and behold, a few months later, they brought out the EM1 Mark II, which dealt with the issues I had. So it all of a sudden became a lot easier to justify using it. And then over the course of a few more months, I just gradually used the Olympus system more, used my old system less. And it got to the point where it was just like my old system was redundant and I was just using Olympus all the time.
Which camera do you use now?
So I use the OM1 Mark II. I've ended up with two of them just because it's nice to have. I always like to have a second shooter when it's suitable, with a shorter lens and a longer lens on. So just having them as a mirror image of one another is really, really useful. But I must have been working with them for 8 or 9 years now, and it's been great. They are such a wonderful team. They are so friendly and open. They do so much with the community. They want to engage with the community. They want to help the community. So all of their online videos, their live videos, Coffee with the Claires, which they still do occasionally. You know, that it becomes a family. It's not just a brand that you are a customer with. It's a family.
I know what you mean. They're real people. They don't feel very corporate, if you know what I mean. So yeah, it was good. What sort of impact would you say it's had on your career?
I would definitely say it's helped in a few regards. So obviously getting a little bit more exposure is always very useful. And they would also essentially hire me to work with them. So doing talks and events and workshops for them. Probably most of all, it's just been nice to have their support when it's been needed. And that doesn't just necessarily mean I need this fixing. Can you fix my lens? Or I want to try and get this lens on low. It's also that just the emotional support. I guess I can't think of another word for it. Just knowing that they're always there, and like you say, that they're people. They're real people. And you'll go to bird fair. You'll work with them at bird fair, and then after you'll go for a beer, and you'll have a meal together, and you'll have a laugh. And also the bonds you create with the other ambassadors.
Yeah. That sort of sense of belonging, I think, sometimes is really nice. Now, you've been published in National Geographic, haven't you? That's no small achievement.
I know that they've used some of my images in some articles. I'm not sure if I've actually had anything proper as of yet. I would love to write an article for them. That would be great.
I thought they'd publish some of your images. I think that counts.
They've definitely used some of my images in some articles. I think some abroad. They've done Nat Geo Kids, but I've not had the real big one yet. I aspire for that.
I'm waiting for the pigeon front cover.
Oh, wouldn't that be a dream?
That'll be it. The pigeons on the front cover.
Yes.
Or mallards.
I don't discriminate.
Okay, well, I think it's a great time to go to 6 from She Clicks. So I've got 10 questions from She Clickers. I would like you to answer 6 of them, please, by picking numbers from 1 to 10. So could I have your first number, please?
Yeah, let's go with 1.
Number 1. Okay, so when photographing wildlife like badgers and hares in winter, do you think it's necessary to have a 2.8 aperture lens to really nail the photo? That's from Penny.
Hi, Penny. So, not necessarily. Typically, when I'm working with the badgers, I don't work with them in winter. They don't hibernate, but they go into something called torpor, which is a lot lower level of activity. Couldn't get that out. A lower level of activity. But because they're nocturnal, you're still working with them in quite low light conditions, typically around sunset. And then with the hares, the light can still be challenging, but that is during the day. And given the fact that they have the white coat, or whitish, it helps a bit on the exposure. So with the badgers, I used to use a 2.8 lens. I used the Olympus 40-150 f2.8. Just because I had a good relationship with them, so they would just walk right up to me, so I didn't need a super long lens. Typically with the mountain hares, I'm using the 150-400, so the widest aperture that I can use is 4.5, and I still think that's absolutely fine. So I wouldn't say it's essential, depending on the camera and the sensor size that you're using. A 2.8 will typically give you a shallower depth of field, so you can isolate your subjects a little bit better, but that's more of an artistic approach rather than the light. I find that if I'm really struggling with the light, I will opt to put my ISO up and drop my shutter speed, knowing I might risk a little bit of motion blur, so I don't worry too much about my aperture.
Okay. Penny was saying she's been using a 500mm lens with an extender, and that means she can only get f14. So her ISO has to go up quite a bit, and she gets a lot of noise. So that, I think f14 is getting a bit challenging, isn't it?
F14 is, in my opinion, a little bit too far. So typically, if I'm using converters, and I will use converters, sometimes I even double them up, I can be pushed to f8. And f8, I really don't want to go any higher than that.
Right.
And I will only use them if the light permits. So if the light's not good, I will sacrifice focal length in order to get a better aperture, get a little bit more light reaching that sensor.
Yeah, I think there's something about recognising the situation for what it is and adapting rather than sort of ploughing on regardless, isn't it? You kind of try and make the best of what you've got rather than try to continue to do what you had in your head.
Yeah, typically I will try and get the keepers first. So I don't like to call them the safe images. But if it's my first encounter, I'll get some images, letting as much light in as possible with the most optimal settings that I can achieve. And then if it's a mountain hare, I've got a general portrait, but I want to get a really close detail shot. If I know I already have the initial images in the bag, it's very difficult to tell on a camera screen, but you'll have a reasonable idea. So once I know I've got it in the bag, if I'm wanting to then start using a load of converters, get a lot closer, knowing that my settings aren't optimal, I'll do it because I know at least I have something. And then I can start being a bit more risky, trying some, I call it arty-farty, intentional camera movement. So get your keepers first with your optimal or as optimal as possible settings. And then if you want to start pushing it a little bit, pop your converters on, change your aperture and see what you need to work with.
Okay, so that was question number 1. Could I have your second number, please?
I'll do 2.
Okay. What is the longest time you've had to wait on location to get a picture? That question is from Marie-Ange.
Can I cop out a bit and say years? Because there's still images I don't have. There's genuinely images that I have in my mind that I've had in my mind for years and years and years where the conditions or the light or the behaviour just haven't lined up. So I might have left the location, gone home and then gone back, but that there's still stuff that years on, I don't have it yet.
Okay.
With wildlife, you need to have a certain level of reactivity because behaviour can happen that you don't anticipate. An opportunity can appear out of nowhere that you didn't expect and you just have to catch it there and then. But I always have specific images in mind as well, which will influence where do I sit, what light angle am I working with, what's the background like. So with those in mind, I'm still waiting for so many of them. But it's worth it when you get them, and you will still get reactive images along the way as you aspire for those ones that you've pre-planned.
Okay. So your third number then, please.
Let's go for 3.
This is a very good one. You're very clear about the welfare of wildlife coming first. How do you deal with instances when you see inappropriate behaviour from humans? That question's from Liz.
Right. This is a difficult one. So, historically, I have been very anti-confrontation, and I'm a complete and utter people pleaser. But when I see behaviour that's just unacceptable, I can't stop myself anymore. My brain-mouth filter is gone, and my mouth will start before my brain engages. Now, it's so easy. If we see something truly atrocious, it's so easy to let anger take over and just to snap at those people. But you're not going to influence or change behaviours in a positive way. If you approach it in that way, people are just going to be defensive, as you would be, and you're just going to end up in a non-productive argument. So I always try to, depending on the situation, if it's a group, I'll try and pull that person to the side so I don't essentially embarrass them in front of their friends. I try to go from the apologetic, educational approach. So I'll usually, I'm so sorry to have to do this or have to say this, but are you aware, for example, that your dog has just attacked a water vole, which is a protected species? I'd be super appreciative if you would mind popping your dog on a lead on this section. Or, if it's on farmland, pointing out farmers got guns. If your dog worries that livestock, your dog could end up in a bit of a sticky situation. So I always try and do it in a friendly way, and I always try and find a way to word it so that it looks like it's benefiting them to behave in a better way. It's not always easy. Quite often, no matter how you word it, some people will just snap back at you and they'll swear at you, and sometimes they get aggressive with you.
Yeah.
So if you're on your own and you're uncomfortable, don't put yourself in a situation that's not safe for you. But if you feel like you can, and if you feel like it's safe, just try and put the anger to one side. And I know how hard that is. I've seen some truly appalling stuff in the past. But try and put it to one side, because you'll get nothing productive from it. And just try and approach it in a polite, educational way. And if it's possible, try and spin it so that you're actually doing them a favour. Pop your dog on a lead, or the farmer's going to have him. Nobody wants to lose their dog. Just keep it safe, keep it friendly, swear about them after.
Good advice. Thank you. Could I have your fourth number, please?
Let's go for 5.
5. Okay. Is there a species that you'd like to lead workshops on the most? And is it the same species that you enjoy photographing the most? So I think that's probably a question about badgers. Would you like to lead workshops on badgers the most? Or is it something else you enjoy workshops on?
Yes, I would. For a brief spell, I did some badger workshops, but because of the location and one of the people looking after the land told the wrong person, and all of a sudden swarms of people were visiting. So I had to basically say I'm not doing it anymore, because the badgers are being negatively impacted by the number of people coming. So my ideal scenario is I would love to meet a landowner who likes wildlife, who would like to make some money from them. Because at the end of the day, if you think about landowners and farmers, sometimes the conflict with wildlife is there because the wildlife costs them money through damage or, some will argue, disease spread, for example. So if you can turn it on its side and say, well, look after the wildlife, let me build a hide, and then you'll make money from the wildlife. That can be quite, everybody's happy then. So I would love to find a wildlife-friendly landowner with badgers who would let me build a hide, and then they can have a chunk of money every time I take someone there. And it means that I can show people the badgers in a safe and secure environment where there's no risk of the location ending up in the wrong hands. There's no risk of swarms of people going, because it would be private land. So that is what I would love to do, because I want more people to be able to see and experience badgers. They have such a negative rap in general, and the media don't like them particularly. And every single person who actually has an experience with a live badger ends up loving them. So to be able to do that would be brilliant. And I get inquiries all the time, and it's so frustrating to have to say, sorry, no, even I'm not photographing them at the moment. And there was a landowner who'd bought a farm, and they were rewilding it, and they had all sorts going on, and they wanted me to work there, and I wanted to work there, but it was over an hour's drive each way. So it just wasn't going to work. The amount of time that you have to spend developing the site, and all of the fuel, it wasn't going to work. So I need to find somewhere local. I would love to do it. I'd absolutely love to do it.
Oh, well, you never know. There might be someone local listening who knows they've got a badger set on their land. That would be good.
That'd be great.
All right, so your penultimate number then, please.
Oh, 7.
Of all of the places you visited, what is your favourite location for wildlife photography? And that question's from Rachel.
I hate that question. I hate that question because it's so hard. The problem is, everywhere that I've been, and I am fortunate I've been to some amazing places, they all shine in their own way. And it's so difficult for me to pick just one place. I loved Alaska for the just vast, untouched wilderness and the experience. Yes, the photography was disastrous, but the experience, I'll never forget it. The Masai Mara, photographically incredible. The light, stunning. The wildlife, just amazing. I loved everything about it. Uganda, everybody goes to Uganda and Rwanda for the mountain gorillas, and they were spectacular. But the chimpanzees were better, in my opinion. And spending 2 days following them through the forest was amazing, like beyond words. I'm forgetting where I've been. Canada's... there's too many places. I honestly can't pick. If you had a gun to my head, I would just fumble and just be, I can't do this. They all just have their own unique charm, and I can't pick.
Well, say, imagine OM Systems got a new lens coming out, and they want you to go and test it, and they say, we will pay for you to go on a trip. Where would you go?
I would like to go to the Falklands and South Georgia, please.
There we go. Have you been?
I haven't been there because it can cost up to £20,000 for a trip, which I don't casually have lying around.
No, not so many people do, I suppose.
But I'd love to.
Okay. All right, well, we'll see what we can do. Your last number then, please.
Better late than never. Let's go for 10.
Number 10. When you did a webinar for SheClicks a few years ago, you were photographing swans on a local lake or a reservoir. Philippa remembers you used to fish out debris and rubbish early in the morning to improve the scene. She's wondering if you've been doing anything with those images. Are you still continuing with that project?
I loved that spot where I used to live. It was a 5-minute drive away. It was very urban, as mentioned. It was full of rubbish and a little bit of a mess. That pair of swans was actually a male gay pair. There's a lot of homosexuality in swans that people aren't always aware of. And what will happen is if you have 2 males, a surrogate female will come in, lay some eggs, leave, and then the males rear the young as if they were their own, which is really sweet. So I lived in hope for a few years that would happen, and it never did. And it was around COVID times. We don't know if the swans just left or possibly passed away, but they disappeared, never came back. And I kept going back time and time again. It was right round the garage from where I get my car done. So I kept going and checking, and the swans just never came back. So I still worked with some of the coots and the mallards, and there were plenty of Canada geese there as well. So I did still pop and see them occasionally and try and photograph them. But now that I've moved, it's not a disastrous distance away, but there's another location I can go that's slightly closer now. And it does have swans, and it's got grebes, and it's got various bits and bobs. So I think moving forward, the plan will be to try and work there. I'm not opposed to travelling, but I think it's better overall if you're not travelling huge distances every day for photography. From a fuel perspective, from a time perspective, So I prefer to work locally, and I'm hoping this new site will pay dividends. But the light is not as good as that site. The sunrise lined up beautifully there. So I'm kind of a little bit sad still to have lost that one.
Well, thank you so much for answering all those questions, Tesni. It's been really lovely to hear from you.
Pleasure. I'm always happy to come back again.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of the She Clicks Women in Photography podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Special thanks to everybody who sent in a question. You'll find links to Tesni's social media channels and website in the show notes. I'll be back with another episode soon, so please subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast platform and tell all your friends and followers about it. You'll also find She Clicks on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube if you search for She Clicks Net. So until next time, enjoy your photography.